Welcome in to the 2025 NHL Atlantic Division Locked On Preview. We've got the Battle of Ontario and Battle of Florida coming up next.
This is the Locked On Podcast Network's 2025 NHL Season Preview. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Locked On NHL. We've got another division preview here, and this time it's the Atlantic Division, and we've got a battle of a province, Battle of Ontario, myself, Brandon Pillar for the Locked On Senators podcast, and David Morassutti with the Locked On Leafs. And then going down south, we've got the Battle of Florida with Nick Morgan on Locked On Lightning and Armando Velez with Locked On Florida Panthers. I'll start with my provincial partner here, David. You get the last laugh. The Toronto Maple Leafs beat the Ottawa Senators in the playoffs yet again as our big brother figure. Unfortunately, the Sens weren't able to pull off the full comeback. You guys almost let the Sens get back into it, but how are you feeling after a long off season?
It takes a little bit of getting used to the changes that were made. Sometimes change can be a little uncomfortable, and the Leafs did go through some change, obviously. To much chagrin of some Leafs fans, I will be bringing up Mitch Marner's name right now. He who shall not be named, but that's a big player gone, right? And that takes a lot for the coaching staff. Is like, how do we go out and replace a guy who scored over 100 points, played on the penalty kill, one of your more trusted forwards in big game situations? Obviously, in the playoffs, the performances weren't there, and that's kind of the balancing act. The team's feels better with the depth that they're able to create from not having a Mitch Marner player in terms of the salary. But now you got to figure out how your team dynamic changes with a player like that gone, because he's a small player, but he had a big role on this team. So there's just a lot of adjustments. I feel like they're going to be coming about. A lot of things are going to be a little uncomfortable at first, but hopefully in the long run will come into work out.
And we'll go down to Florida, but we'll let Armando wait a little bit because he's had a lot of time to shine in the spotlight. Twice defending Stanley Cup champions, the Florida Panthers. So I'll throw it to you, Nick. How are you feeling after this offseason?
I feel great because it's the first offseason in, I want to say, 4 or 5 years where we haven't had to retool on the fly. And that's kind of the biggest optimism for the Bolts this year, is just they're bringing back pretty much everybody. It's been David, I'm sorry that you're going to have to figure it out this year, but it's tough whenever there's a hole in the roster, whether it's for salary cap reasons, whether you just need to make a change. Whenever there's a big absence of somebody who's helped you, in many cases for us, win 2 Stanley Cups, it's not easy to replace that. This year, we haven't had to do any of that. We're bringing back all of our leading scorers. We're bringing back the same 6 defensemen that we used pretty much game in, game out last year. Really, the only change is Luke Glendenning's gone, and we're switching up one spot on the 4th line. So as long as everybody stays healthy, I feel like the chemistry this year is going to get off to a quicker start. I feel like there's really, other than maybe some player age, no reason, or at least none that we've seen, that anybody is going to regress. So I think the Lightning are still hanging around in that conversation for prime contender for not just the division, but for a Stanley Cup as well.
And if you're going to get a Stanley Cup, you're likely going to have to go through Armando's team, the Florida Panthers. I can't think of any real reason why you would have optimism after this offseason.
Yeah, lots of optimism, especially with Bill Zito's ability to bring the majority of the guys back, re-signing Brad Marchand, Aaron Ekblad, and Sam Bennett, especially those 3 of the free agents for the Florida Panthers who were pending after their second consecutive Stanley Cup championship. And the fact is, when you win and you have the rising cap like they did this offseason compared to what was since 2020 with COVID, it gave the Florida Panthers an opportunity to pounce and bring everybody back together. And, maybe this doesn't happen if they don't win the Stanley Cup final as convincingly as they did, setting a record for most time led in a single Stanley Cup final. But this season coming up, it doesn't mean that there won't be challenges, because Matthew Tkachuk is expected to miss time until at least December at the very earliest. Tomas Nosek is going to be missing a significant amount of time. So the Panthers will have to find a way to navigate through the schedule early on in the season. But thankfully for them, it's a very home-heavy start to the schedule. And I've discussed this many times on the show. Coming up after January, their longest homestand is no more than 3 games after January. So we'll see how the Panthers really truly navigate things with bringing everybody back together.
It's gonna be really tough for them to get out of that sunny weather when they're not there. So I feel pity for them.
Yeah,
just hope Florida stays a tax-free state. And
yeah,
everybody's good.
I don't see that changing anytime soon, much to the annoyance of every other team that's not in tax-free states, specifically some certain Canadian teams that don't have that advantage at all whatsoever. Now, as far as the Ottawa Senators go, this is an optimistic franchise after missing the playoffs for 7 straight years, something that neither the 3 of you guys have had to endure with your teams in a long time, those long playoff droughts. The Ottawa Senators were able to punch back up against the Leafs, down 3-0. Sure, they don't make the comeback full, but they made it at least an interesting series. And it was that much needed experience for pretty much their entire team, who Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle, Jake Sanderson, Ridley Gregg, Shane Pinto, Thomas Chabot. I could go on and on and on about all these guys that had 0 games of NHL Stanley Cup playoff experience. Now you get 6 games under your belt. You understand more what you need, what it takes to at least be competitive in a round 1. So there's a lot of optimism in the nation's capital. And Brady Tkachuk, the leader, set the standard, being like, look, we're not going to be just content and happy to just be in the playoffs. We want to start doing some damage. And he's got a front row seat watching his big brother, Matthew Tkachuk, have lots of playoff success. So he's going to want a taste of that himself. And hopefully one day he can be inviting Matthew to a Stanley Cup party rather than attending one on his own. But to get to the playoffs, guys, you got to have a good regular season, and our friends over at FanDuel have set the over-unders for points for all of our teams. We're pulling it up here on YouTube. For the Florida Panthers, their points are set at 105.5 over-under. The Lightning, 102.5. Leafs, 99.5. And the Sens at 95.5. Let's start with you, Armando, because your team is the highest here at 105.5. Now, sure, the Florida Panthers, they go back to the Stanley Cup final and win the Stanley Cup yet again, but they weren't the division leaders, and you would have hit the under considerably on that number if that was what it was last season with 98 points. How are you feeling about hitting more than 105 points this regular season?
I would go with the under for the Panthers because, the Panthers were the first team to win the Stanley Cup, not having home ice advantage throughout the entirety of the playoffs since the 2012 Los Angeles Kings. But the fact is that a lot of guys are going to be sidelined, and, Alexander Barkov never plays an 82-game season neither, so that's bound to happen for the Panthers as well. Guys are going to be stepping up into the lineup. Anton Lundell to top line center, and you never know how, and the fact is that the Panthers have a new backup goaltender. You don't know how they're going to be looking behind the Danil Tarasov starts for the Panthers neither. And there's also a new third pair with Jeff Petrie in the mix. So it's also going to be. I'm interested to see how the beginning of the season is going to be for the Panthers there, and it might let them to not winning the division. So it's funny because I had a show with Kevin Rogers of Locked On Bets, and he was projecting that the Tampa Bay Lightning have the best chance possibly to win the division, and I would go for the under for the Panthers there.
All right, well, that's a good natural transition to you, Nick. Your over-under is set at 102.5. Do you agree with Armando's proposal there that the Lightning could be a division leader and that you'll surpass that point total?
Thank you for making me sound less cocky when I say this, Armando. But I'm going yes, and I'm with you. I do think the Lightning are bringing everybody back. I think the way that Florida has performed these past few years has kind of made people forgot that the Lightning just won 2 Stanley Cups themselves within the past 5 years. All of their players from that team are back. They have some good young people coming up. And I think you're going to see the Lightning take advantage of some chaos in this division. I mean, like we said, we don't know how the Leafs are going to look without Marner. There's also, question marks with you, Brandon. In Ottawa, there's question marks in Montreal. I mean, there's reason to believe other teams are going to take a step back. Looking at you, Boston. I mean, there's just I think a lot of chaos around the division this year, and when that happens, I think you have to look at the team who's been here before and has performed in these situations before, and that's the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I'm going to go the over, and I agree. I would say they are a division favorite.
And now let's go to last year's division winner, the Toronto Maple Leafs. David with Locked On Leafs. Your over-under is set at 99.5. So can you hit triple digits again or maybe not?
That number kind of baffles me a little bit because the last time the Leafs had under 100 points in a full 82-game regular season was the first year of Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner in the league together. That's 2016, 2017. So I understand you lose Mitch Marner, but does that mean that you all of a sudden go from 108 points to maybe you get 100? Like, I still think there's good things that this Leafs team has. Goaltending being one of them. They still have a pretty good tandem. Yeah, they don't have an Andrei Vasilevsky that can steal you games each and every night. But I thought that tandem was a big reason why this Leafs team had that consistency at the top of the standings. And I would take the over on that because, they've had 111 points, 115 points. So even if they have, a few games where they, it doesn't go their way, I still think they're within the 105 to 108 point range that they were last year. So I don't know. And Austin Matthews wasn't at his best last year. Like, a healthy Austin Matthews makes such a big difference for this team. So, if you want to bet the under on the Leafs for this one, do it at your own peril.
And as for the Ottawa Senators, their over-under is set at 95.5. Last year, the Sens finished with 97. I'm not going to be too crazy, too cocky here, but it's always about just getting 1% better. I know 1 point on 97 isn't exactly 1 point, not a math guy, but I'm going the Sens are going to get 98 points. So I think they're going to get that over. I don't think they'll smash it by any means, but I don't see them regressing from last year's point total of 97. So all of us are pretty optimistic here. Although, Armando, I feel like it doesn't really matter where the Florida Panthers finish. Just get to the playoffs and they can figure it out.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So
find a way. Get healthy.
All 4 of our teams were in the playoffs last season, and all 4 of us hoping to see that again. But how big were our team's off-season additions, or maybe the subtractions are more of a factor here? We'll get into that right after this break. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Look, most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's your 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. Don't do that. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, and get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Monarch's helped me maximize my investments, increase my savings rate, easily review my finances with my partner and or financial advisor, keeping a clear view of my financial health week to week and long term. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, everyone. Brandon Pillar here with David, Nick, and Armando of Locked On Leafs, Locked On Lightning, and Locked On Panthers. We teased it before the break. Off-season additions, or for a lot of our teams, more likely the off-season subtractions are going to be the bigger story, as neither team, and if anyone wants to hop in here, correct me if I'm wrong, neither team really made a massive, major splash as far as additions go.
Don't think so. No.
Oh,
Yeah, it was more like keeping everybody for in the case of the Panthers and just adding a few veterans. Luke Cunnin, Matthew Tkachuk's childhood friend, who Bill Zito was also his agent. Jeff Petrie, who spent some time with Montreal, Detroit, and now going to be the new third pair guy as Nate Schmidt walked. And then the trade for Danil Tarasov, someone Bill Zito knew in Columbus, who him and Sergei Bobrovsky are actually from the same exact hometown in Russia. And Bobrovsky looked up to Tarasov's dad, and Tarasov looked up to Bobrovsky. So we're hoping that with Bobrovsky being in the last year of his contract, maybe this could be a transition for the next goalie of the Panthers, unless Bobrovsky signs a short-term deal after this year. But that's the part that the Panthers are trying to figure out for now and the future.
So with you, Armando, I want to tie more into the guys that you kept, because I think the second the Stanley Cup was awarded, everyone's question was, well, who amongst Bennett, Marchand, and Ekblad are going to be gone? Is it going to be 1, 2, or 3 of them? Nobody, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe you thought it, but nobody thought they were going to keep all 3 of these guys. Just how surprised and how pleased were you that they were able to do that?
I said that 2 out of the 3 were going to stay, not all 3, but then it was the order: Bennett, Ekblad, then Marchand in that. So the priority were the guy who won the Conn Smythe, then the homegrown player, and then the guy who really took the Panthers to a different level in this year's Stanley Cup playoffs for them. And the thing is, with the term, some of them might not age well. I mean, the Ekblad contract does have an opportunity to age well because he's making lesser. It's a lesser percentage, but the Bennett contract, that one's going to be looking good in the first few years and might not look so great at the tail end of it. But thankfully, most of Bill Zito's contracts expire either at 2030 or the no movement clauses go to modified no trades after that. So there's still some future flexibility there for the Panthers front office.
Yeah, Armando's looking ahead to 2030 when he's looking at guys leaving. Nick, let's go to you here. The Tampa Bay Lightning, like you mentioned, they're pretty much running it back from last season, but in a case similar to the Ottawa Senators, their biggest additions weren't in the offseason, but at the trade deadline or right around the trade deadline. So how do you think those players are going to perform? And I mean, Yanni Gourde, a returning Tampa Bay Lightning.
Well, I was going to have Yanni Gourde back because the fourth line, I think, was a weak spot for the Lightning for a lot of last year. And now you have a guy that's coming in and sort of being the anchor for the bottom 6. And he's even more important because Nick Paul is going to be out for at least the first month of the season. Oliver Bjorkstrand, to me, is a very intriguing guy that we got at the deadline because, you know, we saw him in Columbus. We know he's got some offensive potential, or at least some depth, you know, offensive output. Showed that a little bit in Seattle, but now he's coming in and kind of being a depth player for the Lightning. I really like what I saw from him before he got hurt, before the playoff series started last year. And he's come back in camp and has looked really, really solid. And John Cooper's using him as kind of a Swiss Army knife in a lot of different roles on the power play and the penalty kill as sort of that bumper winger who adds some energy to the third line. So that's a guy that I'm intrigued. The one off-season addition we did make, and David, back me up on this, Pontus Holmberg, that's a name I think to watch if you're a Tampa Bay Lightning fan, because he's a player that, you know, he's not a star. He's not going to score a lot, but does a lot of things well. And I think he's going to fit that sort of Brian Boyle, Pat Maroon, Alex Killorn, you know, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare role of just sort of being a vibes guy that you can use in a lot of different scenarios. So there are some new faces or newer faces that I think are going to make a big impact in the Lightning this season.
Yes, Pontus Holmberg. I think what I will say with him, you can put him up and down the lineup for sure. The Leafs had him at points on the second line. They've used him at center. They had him on the third line. Maybe miscasted in some ways as a second guy. He just doesn't have the offense, but he puts the effort in. You'll never question Pontus Holmberg's effort, and the fact that he was able to earn himself minutes with a coach like Craig Berube, I think will work pretty well with John Cooper, who's also a very demanding coach for what I've seen, and demands his players to bring some energy. And I think that's what he will definitely bring. He'll bring the energy. But if you're seeing him playing your top six a lot, that means someone in your top six is either hurt or not performing to John Cooper standards. But I think that's, it affords them a really nice, versatile option to go up and down the lineup.
Now, I saved you for last, David, for a reason, because pretty much the Leafs out of the three of us had the biggest change, I'll call it, in the offseason. Mitch Marner signed and then immediately traded to the Vegas Golden Knights. And the Leafs have had to find ways to, I don't want to say replace him, but let's say use that extra cap space to fill out the rest of the roster. In your opinion, how do you think they did? Does this team look better to you or just different?
I think what they did is they took one player and they made three other players show up, right? They took Mitch Marner with the money they would have paid Mitch Marner. They brought in three other guys. Now, are they household names? Not really, right? Like Matias Michelli, somebody who fell out of favor in Utah, and you're kind of like if he fell out of favor in Utah, how's he going to do in Toronto? But they're hoping that with the opportunity to play with players that are a little bit better in Toronto, like an Austin Matthews, John Tavares, Will Nylander, it'll get him back to what he was earlier in his career and be able to produce a little more points. I look at his playmaking ability. That's where you hope that he can kind of replace some of what you lose with Marner there, somebody who can help set up goals for your top guys. And then you see the thing they got back from Mitch Marner, which is Nicola Waugh, which unfortunately for him, he's always going to be tied to that deal. But it answers one of the bigger questions that the Leafs have had is who's going to be your third line center. Like they've tried so many different things, throwing Max Domi there. He's not really a third line center. So now they can comfortably say that, from 1 to 4, they have options that are going to work out a lot better than what they would have had beforehand. And then Dakota Joshua, Leafs are usually the ones making the opposite of these trades to shed salary. They actually took on a player who, not a bad player. He's just, the Canucks were like, we really can't afford to have this player. So Leafs are like, okay, we actually can afford him. So bring him on. And they didn't really give up much to get him. And he's the exact type of player that Craig Berube needs. Physical. He's going to play, get under the skin of the opposing players. Florida, that's like the type of guy that you want to go up against a team like Florida, Ottawa, like the nastiness, right? Even Tampa has some guys who are nasty too. So, sorry. So just bringing in those three guys changes the dynamic. That's really what it comes down to. And it wasn't like big splashes, but just the little details that these guys can bring. They're hoping together can kind of replace what Marner, what you lose with Marner. And, people's like, oh, that's all they did. Well, it's also because at the trade deadline, they added Scott Lawton and Brandon Carlo, two guys who are, pretty significant additions if they were to come here in the offseason. And they paid they paid a price for those two players because they had term when they brought them in. That's something the Leafs had never really done very often. They're always bringing in a guy, he's gone in the offseason, right? Ryan O'Reilly, gone. I look at Nick Foligno.
Yep.
Gone. The Leafs had done too much of that over the years. So they actually decided, let's bring in guys. If we can get somebody with term, it actually helps, eliminate the need to go out and make those big moves in the offseason because, frankly, in free agency, there really wasn't. If you're trying to find a Mitch Marner replacement, there really wasn't a guy there that the Leafs could bring in to really help, replace him. So what they did, we'll just see if we can get some internal improvement as well as bringing in guys, that were not fit elsewhere.
Oh, we lost Armando there. He didn't like your points, David, so he bounced out of here.
Yeah, as soon as I brought Dakota Joshua, he's like, nah, I don't like this guy. I'm out.
Yeah, screw him. Screw Ohio State.
Yeah. And here's Armando. He's back. So as you mentioned something, David, that I want to key in for the Ottawa Senators is internal growth. So many of the Ottawa Senators cornerstone franchise guys are young. And like I mentioned, they got that taste of the playoffs. And you're expecting Tim Stützle to score more goals than he did last year. If Brady Tkachuk can stay healthy, this was the first time in his career that he wasn't healthy after that Four Nations face-off tournament. He spent some time on the shelf. And then Jake Sanderson did not start out the season the way we are used to seeing Jake Sanderson. And then you bring in those trade deadline acquisitions in Dylan Cousins and Fabian Zetterlund. Dylan Cousins was able to transition pretty smoothly because he went from being a second-line center in Buffalo to being a second-line center in Ottawa. But Fabian Zetterlund struggled to fit in here. But the Ottawa Senators showed they believe in him as they extended him this offseason to a 4-year deal, and he's likely going to have a bigger role than he did initially. And if you're a Sens fan, you're underwhelmed by the big offseason splashes of Lars Eller, and Jordan Spence actually is an exciting one. He's going to be a nice boost to that decor, but overall, the big additions for the Ottawa Senators did happen at the trade deadline, kind of like the Tampa Bay Lightning, like we were talking about. Now, like I mentioned, all 4 of these teams, they made the playoffs. I would say all of them have aspirations to do more, apart from Armando. You can't do much more than winning the Stanley Cup again, although a three-peat does not happen very often, so that would be extremely exciting for everyone down in the Sunshine State. Well, not everyone, I should say. But what is at stake for each team here? We're going to get into that next. You're listening to Locked On NHL. All right, back here with an Atlantic Division preview on Locked On NHL, Locked On Sens, Locked On Leafs, Locked On Panthers, and Locked On Lightning, all here representing. So we're going to discuss what is at stake for each team. I would say all 4 of our teams have something at stake here, and if expectations are not met, things could change. I'll start with you, though, Armando. The Florida Panthers, 3 straight Stanley Cup finals, 2 straight Stanley Cup victories. Are they in a state where if they don't make it to the finals or at least don't look like the same Florida Panthers in the playoffs, that there could be changes made? Or is it kind of like, look, Bill Zito, Paul Maurice, what more can you ask from them? If they have a bit of a down year, whatever you want to call that, they're still perfectly safe. Is there, I guess, better way to word this, is there anything at stake for the Florida Panthers?
I mean, you don't bring the guys back that you did for just for bringing them back. You want to try to run it back and do it again, all over again. And I actually did have an episode saying, is it actually cup or bust for the Florida Panthers? And I said, yes, it is for them. But at the same time, if they don't win the Stanley Cup, there's also lessons that can be learned from it, and that they could take away, because you think about the LA Kings, they didn't win in consecutive years. The Blackhawks didn't win in consecutive years. So there's also things that you could look and to improve the roster, as there's going to be guys who are going to be up for contracts even next year. Nico Mikkola as a depth defenseman. I said in an episode that they should hold off on extension talks and wait to see what the state of the cap is. Plus, if they three-peat, Mackie Samoskevich is likely going to get a bridge deal come next offseason. They actually signed him to a 1-year deal this offseason because they just needed to fit everybody. But yeah, this was all to go all in once again. They're not going to be really active at the trade deadline. Yeah, there's going to be a playoff cap this time around, so there's going to be some tough decisions to be made on an Evan Rodriguez or a Jesper Boquist when Matthew Tkachuk is actually healthy enough to play. So their depth is going to be dwindled a little bit once midseason comes around. So it's going to be harder, but the Panthers do have the core in place. They have a core 10, which is crazy to even say out loud to begin with, a core 10 that's like locked up for many years. So if there are changes that are going to be made, it's going to be very minor ones.
Nick, I want to transition it to you with 2 questions. As a fan of a team that basically ran the East for quite a while and had multiple Stanley Cups in a short window of time, where do the Florida Panthers or where did the Tampa Bay Lightning rank on? Are they dynasties? Do you believe either team achieved dynasty status in their heights? And then transition that into what you believe the expectations are for the Tampa Bay Lightning.
if you win back-to-back cups and you go to 3 cup appearances in 3 straight years, which both of our teams did, because the Lightning lost to the Avalanche the year after they won back-to-back, yeah, I would say there's at least some talk of a dynasty there. Okay. Number 2, for the Lightning, the big question I think that everybody is asking is just how long is this window open? And if you talk to a lot of, I guess, pundits around the league, there's been a lot of talk about the window's closed. Look what Florida's doing. They're stepping up. You look at Montreal and Ottawa kind of peeking around the corner. Even Detroit starting to creep up there with some of their prospects. You're thinking, okay, this is a team that maybe doesn't have a lot of time left. That's the biggest question, is just how much you can do in this small window you have. And look, if something happens this year, the bigger question is just going to be, how did it happen? If we missed the playoffs, was it because everybody got hurt and there just wasn't the depth there? Or is it because Victor Hedman doesn't look like Victor Hedman anymore, or Kucherov doesn't look like Kucherov? That to me is the more alarming, I guess, state of the franchise. And that's, I think, when you have to look at and say, like, okay, we might need to take some steps to build towards our future. But if we're in a state where, we look good again and we win a division title and nobody takes a step back, then yeah, I do think there's an expectation to challenge Florida and get back to the Eastern Conference Finals at the very least. Otherwise, yeah, if we crash out in the first round again, I think there might be some questions about this team moving forward.
Well, David, as someone that lives in the heart of enemy territory, myself being in Collingwood, Ontario, I hear it every year. It's the Leafs' year. They finally figured it out. They're going to go all the way. Everybody that's been waiting since 1967 is finally going to be satisfied. How do you feel about the Toronto Maple Leafs? Is the change of no longer having that core 4, Armando flexed on you with the core 10, doesn't rhyme or sound as good, but the core 4 is finally over. Does that exceed expectations, being like, all right, we've changed our core, now we can finally move on from the steps that we feel we've been stuck at? Or is it like, okay, no Mitch Marner here, maybe we need to temper expectations?
No, I think as long as you have the players that you have, you're expected to be at least playoffs. And like this Leafs team is not in a position to say, oh, well, we'll just get to the playoffs and see what happens. No, the expectation for all these years has been to finally end that drought. Yeah, getting one playoff series win a few years ago against Tampa, that was like the joy I had. It was like, kind of, when you look at it, it was amazing. It was an amazing feeling. And it's also like, need more guys. Like it's that constant build towards getting, when as you move on, it does get tougher. The Leafs have the horses, right? And I think it's been proven that the amount of attention spent on the core 4 has really put in a spotlight on the fact that the rest of the team just wasn't at that level that it needed to be. So I felt like what they did address that in a way, and there's going to be a need to, I think, further evaluate how that goes and how that changes. But this is a Leafs team that is all about contending. And, when you have an Austin Matthews still signed for a few years, when you still, you got Nylander, you gave a big ticket to Matthew Knies, expecting him to take a step, right? Like, this isn't a roster that's built to just make a playoff run, like make the playoffs. It's supposed to go that and more. So the expectation doesn't change. As long as you have these players around, it ain't going to change.
If I could add something to that, David, do you feel the fact that because Marner is gone and the fact that it's a second year under Berube and more guys are now getting acclimated into the system, not necessarily that the pressure is off of Toronto, but do you feel that this team is so much lighter going into a season?
Berube does a good job of kind of insulating that, right? He doesn't like, if you bring up core 4 to him anymore, he might snap on you. Like he might snap. Like he said he's tired of hearing that. I think they're trying to change this narrative around what this team is, the identity of what this team is, the culture of this team. I hate always saying that, but like I've truly understood what
No
that
doubt.
means now, right? And we heard after going into this year, one game away, right, to making that conference final. It's like, well, we like got to stop saying that, but at the same time, it's also like, why didn't they do it, right? Certain guys, they didn't rise to the occasion. Like Mitch Marner, as good as a player he was in the regular season, you bring up the game 5, 6, and 7 stats, and it's like just wasn't there for you, right? Your best player wasn't your best player. So you're kind of saying, okay, we're going to take that responsibility and shift it to a bunch of other guys and saying, okay, Marner's gone. You guys do not have to do it, right? And I think that's what this year is going to be all about, is building that trust throughout the lineup. It ain't going to be easy, right? But you have to trust the whole team to get the job done now. I mean, I'm sure in Ottawa, it's probably the reverse now. It's probably a lot more pressure on the stars as opposed to the whole team to elevate the centers into what they need to be.
Yeah, definitely the young players feel the pressure. Brady Tkachuk, the leader, he knows he needs to find a way to not just get to the playoffs and be happy with that, but to win a playoff round. I don't think it's realistic for the Ottawa Senators to have clear Stanley Cup aspirations, but you got to do it one round at a time, and they made the playoffs. That's great. Now you got to build on that, and you got to find a way to win a round and move on, because no matter who any of our teams play in the playoffs, I think it's fair to say it's going to be a tough matchup. Like really in the East, especially in the Atlantic, with 5 of the 8 playoff teams coming from the Atlantic Division, there's really no layups as far as playoff rounds go. So it's going to be fascinating no matter how things go. The regular season is coming around the corner. Preseason is upon us. Just a couple weeks till the real deal. So all of us here are excited for our teams to get going. For myself, Brandon Pillar, for David Morassutti, for Armando Velez, and Nick Morgan, we thank you for watching this edition of Locked On NHL, the Atlantic Division Preview. And you can find all of our shows on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Stay tuned for the rest of the Locked On NHL Division Previews coming up later on. There we go.
Perfect.
Good job, Brandon.
Nice.